Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be celebrated by strangers, but forgotten by the people who raised you? My name is Rachel Monroe, and for most of my life, I was the daughter of the picture-perfect family, the one with the manicured lawn, a 3-car garage, and polite smiles that convinced everyone we were doing just fine. To the outside world, we were the Monroes of Westfield, Colorado, admired, respected, even envied. My father, Ethan, was a decorated county prosecutor who never lost a major case. My mother, Grace, taught developmental psychology at the local university and spoke at parenting conferences about nurturing independent thinkers. And then there was me, their firstborn, quiet, observant, and often overlooked. From the front porch, our lives looked like a model of suburban harmony. My parents hosted summer brunches where neighbors praised our family's unity. My younger brother Noah was the golden boy, captain of the swim team, featured in the local paper, showered with praise and expectation. Me? I was the one behind. The camera, always helping, never asked to be seen. It took me years to realize that love, in our house, came with fine print. That attention had a price. And that sometimes, the ones who claim to support you the most are the ones quietly undoing you. But this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when you stop asking for a seat at the table and start building your own. My earliest memories weren't traumatic in the loud, cinematic way people often imagine. There were no slamming doors, no screaming matches echoing through the house. Instead, it was a quiet erosion, subtle, polished, and socially acceptable. I was 6 when my brother Noah was born. I still remember standing in the hospital hallway, holding a teddy bear that I'd picked out with my allowance, hoping it would be his first toy. When my parents emerged from the delivery room, their faces lit with a kind of joy I'd never seen directed at me. My mother barely looked in my direction. My father simply said, "Say hi to your baby brother, Rachel. Your job now is to help him grow." And I tried. I really did. I made his bottles, sang lullabies I barely knew the words to, and later helped him learn his alphabet. But slowly, the role of big sister started to look more like support staff. When I won a ribbon for reading the most books in me. 2nd grade, my parents missed the ceremony. Noah had a preschool art show. When I was chosen to narrate the school's winter play, they told me they couldn't attend because Noah had the flu. I understood. Or at least I told myself I did. But it wasn't about timing or emergencies. It was a pattern. My mother often said things like, "You're the independent one, Rachel. You don't need constant praise." At the time, I thought that was a compliment. Later, I realized it was a convenient excuse not to offer the attention I quietly craved. My father was no different. He'd call Noah champ, ruffle his hair, and beam with pride after every minor milestone. With me, he reserved a more measured tone. Approval came in half sentences. "That's fine. Looks decent. Just make sure you double-check next time." It was as if my effort was always being weighed and found slightly insufficient. Things shifted further when I turned 9. That year, I taught myself how to braid my own hair because my mother was too busy with Noah's speech therapy appointments. I had no speech delays, no behavioral issues, no demands, and it became clear. In our home, being low maintenance wasn't rewarded. It was taken for granted. Noah, on the other hand, became the center of everything. Our dining room was slowly transformed into his learning hub, filled with puzzles, flashcards, and early robotics kits. My science fair poster was taped to the fridge for 2 days before it was replaced with one of Noah's stick figure drawings labeled Future Scientist. I asked once jokingly if we were building a shrine to him. My mother frowned. "Don't be sarcastic, Rachel. You know how hard he's working." And that was the thing. I was working too. I always had been. The difference was, no one noticed. Unless I slipped up. By the time I entered middle school, I had stopped telling my parents about my achievements. What was the point? I knew the routine. Even when I brought home a straight-A report card, my father would say, "Well, that's expected of you." No smile, no pride, just a benchmark that I was supposed to meet without acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Noah received enthusiastic applause for passing math with a C+. "He's improving," they'd say with genuine excitement. The message wasn't shouted, it was implied. It lived in the pauses, the redirected conversations, the way their eyes always seemed to find Noah in the room first. And slowly, I began to shrink in my own home. Not out of rebellion, but out of resignation. It's strange how early children start measuring their worth in glances and silences. I learned that praise was reserved for noise, for mess, for attention seekers. And I was too quiet, too careful, too easy to forget. That was when I began journaling, not for creativity, but for proof. Proof that I had been there, that I had felt things, that I had accomplished more than anyone had noticed. I wasn't trying to be exceptional. I was just trying to be visible. And in a family that had already decided who the star would be, my presence became a footnote to someone else's spotlight. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind where the sunlight made the hardwood floors glow, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. I had just turned 12 and was halfway through reorganizing the books on my shelf, sorting them by author, when my mother walked into my room holding a tape measure. She didn't knock. She never did. "We're thinking of moving Noah up here," she said, scanning the walls without making eye contact. "He's growing fast and needs more space for his projects." I blinked. "This is my room." She smiled faintly, already pulling the measuring tape across my desk. "You've had it long enough, sweetie. The attic room is still cozy. And quieter. The attic. It was barely insulated with one small window and a ceiling so slanted I had to crouch in half of it. We used it to store holiday decorations and boxes of old files. It was never meant to be lived in. But I wasn't asked. I was informed. That night, I came back from my volunteer shift at the local library to find my posters taken down, my dresser, half empty, and my mattress already propped against the attic wall. Noah was spinning in my desk chair, grinning like he'd won a prize. My mother had labeled a new drawer set with his name, complete with new bins for his robotics gear. My father was installing additional shelves, his version of bonding. No, one spoke to me. I climbed the attic stairs slowly, carrying a box of my journals. The air was musty, the bulb above flickered. My bed barely fit against the wall, and the only outlet was cracked and overloaded. I sat on the mattress, surrounded by boxes of fake Christmas wreaths and outdated yearbooks, and waited to feel something. Anger, sadness, anything. But all I felt was small, reduced. Like a utility no longer needed in its original space, quietly relocated to where it wouldn't be in the way. The next morning, my mother knocked, only once, and poked her head in. "Make the best of it, Rachel. You're mature enough to handle this kind of adjustment?" "Noah needs the room for his development." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I had learned it didn't matter. That attic room became my world for the next 6 years. I decorated it with string lights and repurposed furniture from the garage, trying to make it mine. But it never felt like home. It was a storage unit they called a bedroom. A symbol of where I stood in the hierarchy of our house. Out of sight, out of priority. I began to speak less at dinner. Started writing more. I learned how to hide resentment behind quiet competence. How to make space for others without being asked. How to give up things before anyone had to take them from me. That attic wasn't just a room. It was a message. You belong where no one has to see you. And for years, I lived as if that were true. By the time I entered high school, I had mastered the art of invisibility. I moved through the hallways of Westfield High with quiet purpose, always early, always prepared. Teachers liked me, diligent, focused, low maintenance. But no one ever asked what I wanted or how I felt. At home, things had calcified into a predictable pattern. Noah at the center, the rest of us in orbit. He was now a rising star in the community, varsity swim team, student council, lead in the school musical, even though he couldn't carry a tune. My parents showed up to every meet, every show, every last-minute award ceremony. The walls of our living room were adorned with framed photos of Noah at different stages: baby in a pumpkin costume, middle school science project, captain's medal draped over his neck. My photos were there too, tucked discreetly on a shelf, partially obscured by a flower vase or a stack of mail. At school, I poured myself into academics and after-school jobs. I worked at the local coffee shop to save for college applications, edited the school paper, and spent weekends tutoring students 2 years older than me. I didn't have time for parties or sleepovers. And while my classmates were counting down to prom, I was calculating scholarship deadlines. Junior year, I entered the statewide STEM Innovation Challenge. I built a working prototype of a soil sensor that could help optimize urban farming, something I'd researched late at night in the attic, under the soft hum of a desk fan I bought myself. Out of 300 entries, I placed first. When I told my parents, their reaction was muted. "That's nice," my mother said. "But Noah just got asked to speak at a youth leadership summit in Boulder. Isn't that exciting?" I didn't even ask if they'd come to the award ceremony. When college applications rolled around, I knew better than to expect support. My parents insisted we had to be realistic about expenses. They were evaluating priorities, which was their way of saying, "No, we won't help you." I found out they had quietly hired a college admissions consultant for Noah, who was eyeing private universities out of state, despite his average grades. I applied to Columbia University, not just because it was prestigious, but because it was far. Far from the quiet suffocation of that house. Far from being an afterthought in someone else's story. The day I got my acceptance letter, I didn't tell anyone for hours. I opened it alone in the attic, knees pulled to my chest, my laptop propped on a milk crate. I remember reading the words, "Congratulations, we are pleased to offer you admission," over and over until they blurred. I had done it. On my own. Later that evening, I told my grandparents, my mom's parents, during one of our regular Sunday phone calls. They were the only people who ever really listened. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked breath, and then, "We'll help," my grandmother said softly. "You deserve to go, Rachel. We'll cover what your scholarships don't." It was the first time in years I cried in front of anyone. My parents never asked how I planned to afford Columbia. They assumed I'd change my mind, maybe settle for a local community college. But I didn't. I packed my things, said a quiet goodbye, and left for New York with 2 suitcases, a full ride, and a promise to myself. I would never again let someone else define what I was worth. New York was overwhelming at first, louder, faster, more indifferent than anything I'd ever known. But it was also the first place I could truly breathe. No one there knew my brother's name. No one expected me to step aside, to be polite and invisible. I moved into a shared dorm room on the 7th floor of a narrow red brick building just off Broadway, my side of the room meticulously organized, with thrifted decor and a printed quote above my desk that read, "Your silence will not protect you." At Columbia, I majored in a dual track of sociology and finance, an unusual combination, I was told. But for me, it made perfect sense. I had lived the consequences of economic disparity and emotional neglect. I wanted to understand not only the emotional cost of favoritism, but also how policies, money, and systems quietly mirrored the same dynamics. I attended my classes religiously, worked the night shift at a bookstore on the Upper West Side, and still managed to join a student research group focused on systemic bias in public institutions. It was in my sophomore year that the seeds of something more began to take root. During a seminar on civic data systems, I became obsessed with how algorithms were being used to reinforce inequality, from predictive policing to credit scoring models that penalized people for circumstances beyond their control. I began sketching out an idea for a transparency tool, a platform that would visualize systemic bias by pulling in publicly available data on local arrests, school suspensions, and housing denials. I called it ECHO. At first, it was just a passion project I worked on during weekends and late nights. But when one of my professors noticed the wireframe during a mentorship session, she urged me to submit it to the university's innovation lab. I did, reluctantly, and within a few weeks I was selected to present it to a panel of civic tech leaders. That presentation changed everything. Not only did I receive a small grant to develop ECHO into a functioning prototype, but I also landed an internship with a policy think tank in D.C. focused on ethical technology and urban planning. That summer, I traded coffee runs for policy briefs, quietly building a reputation as the intern who could connect the dots that others missed. By junior year, ECHO was being beta tested by a coalition of public defenders in New Jersey. I wasn't just building software, I was building something I had never been offered as a child: clarity, proof, a mirror to power. Still, I kept my personal victories quiet. My parents rarely called. When they did, the conversations were shallow. My mother once asked if I'd heard about Noah's new girlfriend, a pre-med student he met at a leadership retreat. "They're such a power couple," she beamed, as if I'd understand how that had anything to do with me. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my senior thesis, a sweeping analysis of generational equity and institutional bias, and on a growing list of grad schools and job opportunities. I was invited to give a TEDx talk that spring, and though it felt surreal to step onto that stage, what stayed with me wasn't the applause or the lights. It was the stillness afterward. The moment I walked off stage alone and realized no one had handed this to me. No one had paved the way. Every inch I had carved out myself. I didn't need gold stars or front-row cheerleaders anymore. I had traded validation for vision, and in that exchange, I'd found something far more enduring. I was no longer surviving. In someone else's story, I was writing my own. Graduating from Columbia felt less like a victory parade and more like crossing a finish line after a solo marathon. I walked the stage in a rented gown, shaking hands with faculty who barely knew how many nights I'd gone without sleep building ECHO, how many deadlines I met while living off granola bars and borrowed Wi-Fi. My parents didn't attend the ceremony. They said flights were too expensive, and besides, Noah was giving a keynote at a youth summit the same weekend. I didn't argue. I'd stopped hoping for applause from that corner of my life a long time ago. 2 weeks later, I joined Verdict Analytics, a fast-growing civic intelligence firm in D.C., known for fusing data science with public sector reform. Their mission felt personal to me, using technology to correct the very systems that had been quietly failing people like me for years. I started as a junior data strategist, one of the youngest in the firm. Most people assumed I'd be quiet and agreeable. I wasn't. I immersed myself in research, everything from predictive policing models to sentencing disparities to digital redlining. My work was meticulous, relentless, and often questioned. But I didn't flinch. I asked harder questions, pushed for cross-referencing overlooked variables, and offered insights others hadn't considered. Within my first year, I led the development of a tool that flagged bias in municipal decision-making, earning internal recognition and an invitation to present at a national public ethics forum. But the real shift came in my second year when I proposed a bolder idea, a dynamic algorithm that didn't just track past bias, but predicted when and where future bias might emerge based on real-time public records, budget allocations, and policy changes. I called it mirror because the system, I believed, needed to see itself before it could correct itself. At first, the proposal was met with hesitation. Too abstract, too risky, too political. But my immediate supervisor, Dev Sharma, saw potential. He encouraged me to prototype it quietly while continuing my regular assignments. I worked late nights again, just like I had in college, writing code between budget audits, testing variables during lunch breaks, refining the interface at 2 a.m., with classical music echoing from my office headphones. 6 months later, Mirror predicted a controversial school rezoning proposal that would disproportionately affect low-income families in 3 counties, weeks before any journalist reported it. That single forecast ignited interest across advocacy networks. Within the year, Verdict Analytics had licensed Mirror to 3 major city councils, and I was promoted to Chief Strategy Officer at the age of 26. Articles followed. Fast. Company, Wired. Even a short profile in the Washington Post titled, "The Woman Who Taught the System to Watch Itself." The recognition felt strange at first. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because for so long, I had existed in a world that treated my effort like background noise. Now, suddenly, strangers were quoting my words in conference panels. City officials were citing my research. Former professors reached out to say they always knew I had it in me. But I knew the truth. They hadn't seen me, not really. I had simply learned to become undeniable. And yet, through all of it, rising paychecks, boardroom meetings, public speaking tours, my parents remained silent. Occasionally, I'd hear from extended relatives that my mother had mentioned I worked with computers and did something important with cities. Noah, meanwhile, had pivoted from business school to starting a podcast about entrepreneurial leadership, funded quietly by my father. But I didn't reach out. I didn't send them news clips or awards or invitations. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to earn their attention. I had attention. I had respect. I had become someone with measurable impact in spaces that once dismissed people like me entirely. The attic girl with a secondhand laptop and a bookshelf full of rejection had become the architect of a system that cities now depended on. I wasn't just breaking the cycle, I was rewriting it, and even then I had no idea just how personal the next chapter would become. Because when I decided to celebrate this milestone, with a small gathering, a nod to everything I'd built, I made the mistake of thinking maybe, just maybe, my family would show up differently. I should have known. When someone is committed to not seeing you, even success becomes another excuse to turn away. By the time I turned 28, I had stopped celebrating my wins in public. Success, for me, had become something quiet, satisfying, but private. But when I was offered a senior equity stake at Verdict Analytics, effectively making me the youngest partner in the firm's history, I felt something shift. Not ego, not entitlement, just a deep, private need to mark the moment, to pause, to honor the years I'd spent surviving, building, proving. So I decided to host a modest celebration. Not flashy, not formal, just something meaningful. A catered dinner, a few trusted colleagues, my grandparents, a handful of mentors. I didn't want press. I didn't want speeches. I just wanted a room of people who had seen me, really seen me, and stayed. When I mentioned it to my mother during one of our rare phone calls, her tone changed instantly. "Why don't we host it at home?" she offered, voice almost bright. "Your father and I would love to help. It could be more intimate, you know. Just family." I hesitated. That word, family, always made me wary. But I was tired. Tired of pretending I didn't care. Tired of carrying all of it alone. Maybe this was a chance to rewrite something, to let them step up just once. "I'll handle the guest list," she added. "You just send over what you want catered. We'll take care of everything else." I transferred $4,000 the next day. enough for food, rentals, flowers, and a few decorative touches. I emailed a small list of invitees to confirm, 15 people, maximum. I didn't ask many questions. I didn't want to micromanage. Maybe, just this once, I told myself, I could trust them. The event was scheduled for the last weekend of October. I flew in from DC late Friday night and checked into a boutique hotel downtown, planning to arrive at the house the next afternoon. I wore a navy blue dress, subtle but elegant, and carried a simple thank you speech in my bag. Just a few words, acknowledging the people who had stood by me, who had never asked me to shrink. I pulled into the driveway, and my heart dropped. The house was wrapped in gold streamers. There were valet attendants, a photographer at the door. Inside, dozens of people milled around, sipping champagne. Music drifted from a string quartet set up near the fireplace. None of this was what I'd asked for. I spotted my grandparents near the back, looking confused but gracious, and beside them, my former academic advisor, visibly out of place in his tweed jacket and timid smile. Then I saw Noah, at the top of the staircase wearing a tailored suit, holding hands with a woman I didn't recognize. Before I could speak, my mother stepped forward, raised her glass, and tapped her ring against it. The room quieted. "Thank you all for coming," she began, beaming. "Tonight, we're here not just to reconnect as a family, but to celebrate something truly special. Noah and Elena are officially engaged." Applause, laughter, champagne flutes clinking, and me, frozen, standing in the foyer of my childhood. Home, watching as the party I had funded became someone else's stage. I caught Noah's eye. He looked down, sheepish. Not apologetic, just mildly uncomfortable, like someone caught bending the truth but hoping it would smooth over. I walked up to my mother, still holding my bag, my speech now crumpled at the bottom. "You turned my celebration into an engagement. Party?" I asked, voice low. She blinked, then smiled as if I'd misunderstood. "We just thought it would be more meaningful this way. Family-oriented. You're so busy in DC. When else would everyone be together?" I felt my father's hand on my shoulder, firm, quiet. "Let it go, Rachel. Don't make a scene." And there it was again. The same script I'd lived my whole life. Don't make a scene. Don't disrupt the moment. Don't expect too much. Stepped back, breathing slowly, grounding myself. The photographer turned toward Noah and Elena for a staged kiss. The room buzzed with congratulations. I looked around, searching for one face that might understand, and met my grandmother's eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. She simply nodded once. As if to say, "This is your moment, if you choose it." I could have left. Quietly gathered my things and disappeared. That was the old version of me, the girl in the attic who swallowed every slight, who made herself small to keep the peace. But the woman who stood in that room now had a different voice, one that refused to go unheard, and in the next moment, I knew. I wasn't going to let this go. Not anymore. I stepped forward, slowly, like someone walking into the center of a stage. They never asked to be on, but were born to own. My heart wasn't racing. It was quiet, strangely steady, like it had been waiting for this moment for years. My father whispered sharply behind me, "Rachel, not now." But I didn't stop. I reached for the microphone in my mother's hand. She hesitated, clutched it a little tighter, then reluctantly let go, her smile faltering, just slightly. I turned toward the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back, many confused, others curious. Noah and Elena were still at the top of the stairs, frozen like statues in a photograph no one would want to frame. "Excuse me," I said calmly, the mic steady in my hand. "I'd like to say a few words." The room hushed. Somewhere in the back, a glass clinked nervously against a plate. I'm so grateful to see so many familiar faces here tonight, I began. But I want to clarify something important. This event was planned to celebrate a personal milestone, my promotion to senior partner at Verdict Analytics. I organized it. I paid for it. And I had hoped to share it with the people who mattered most. A ripple of murmurs spread across the room. My mother took a step forward but stopped when my grandmother gently raised a hand. Her eyes locked on me. I wasn't informed, I continued, that this would be used as an opportunity to announce my brother's engagement. That decision was made without my knowledge, using funds I provided under very different assumptions. I scanned the room, letting the silence stretch. This isn't about the engagement, I said, my voice still calm but firmer now. It's about a lifetime of being erased, of having moments redirected, repackaged, and reassigned, again and again. And tonight, I'm choosing not to stay silent. At the top of the stairs, Elena turned toward Noah, whispering something. He responded quietly, too low for anyone to hear. But his face had shifted. From casual confidence to something harder to name. Embarrassment, maybe. Or recognition. I don't want pity, I added. I don't need applause. But I do deserve the truth to be acknowledged. And tonight, this party, this moment, was never about Noah. I handed the microphone to a stunned event assistant and turned away, walking toward the foyer. Behind me, the room broke into scattered murmurs and glances. Elena followed me with her eyes, then slowly descended the stairs, leaving Noah behind. My mother's face was pale, caught between indignation and fear of what people might think. My father stood still, jaw tight. As I passed my grandparents, my grandmother reached out, clasping my hand tightly. Her grip said everything words couldn't. We see you. We always have. Elena caught up with me just outside the door. Rachel, she said softly, is this true? You funded this? I nodded. She exhaled. He told me it was a small family dinner, just for you. I had no idea this was supposed to be your night. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm sorry. I never wanted to be part of something like this. Before I could respond, Noah appeared behind her, his posture stiff. Why are you making this into a scene? He asked, trying to smile to recover control. You're overreacting. It was a misunderstanding. No, I said clearly. It was a pattern, one that ends tonight. I turned and walked to my car. Elena didn't follow Noah. She lingered for a few seconds longer before quietly slipping back into the crowd. Alone. Inside the house, I could still hear the echo of muffled conversations, shifting energy, the hum of a party unraveling. My mother's voice rising in quiet panic. My father trying to explain away the situation, but none of it touched me now. The weight I'd carried for years, of being the forgotten one, the background support, the uncelebrated achiever, was no longer mine to hold. It was theirs, and they could carry it now. As I drove away from the house where I'd once been pushed, into the attic, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply walks out the door, with its head held high and its silence louder than anything a microphone could carry. The days that followed felt oddly still. No angry texts, no tearful calls. Just silence, the kind I used to fear, but now welcomed like a quiet room after years of noise. I didn't reach out, neither did they. It was as if the confrontation at the party created a line in the sand that no one dared to cross. And for once, I had no desire to erase it. News of the night traveled fast, though. A distant cousin emailed me to say she never realized how hard things had been, and that I had handled it with grace. A former neighbor sent a Facebook message that simply said, "About time someone said it." It was strange, the way people saw you more clearly once you stopped performing politeness. But I didn't care about the applause. The truth wasn't for them, it was for me. Elena called off the engagement 3 days later. My mother claimed she was overreacting, but from what I heard through mutual friends, Elena had started asking questions. Real ones, about the kind of family she was preparing to marry into, about honesty, about control. Noah didn't have the answers she needed. Or maybe he had too many of the wrong ones. Either way, she left, and I wasn't surprised. As for my parents, they retreated behind the wall they always had. Image. My mother wrote a carefully crafted post about the complexities of raising strong-willed children. My father posted an old photo of Noah and captioned it, "Proud of this one." The message was clear: rewrite the narrative, delete the inconvenient truth, move on. But this time, I didn't care. They could curate their story however they liked. I had outgrown the need to be part of it. My grandparents, on the other hand, didn't flinch. A week after the party, they invited me over for dinner. No speeches, no analysis, just baked lasagna, soft jazz playing from an old speaker, and my grandmother humming in the kitchen like she always had. After dessert, they handed me a folder. Inside were updated documents, bank transfers, legal forms, a letter. "We've decided to move the family trust," my grandfather said simply. "To fund your nonprofit, no strings attached." I blinked. "You don't have to do that," he smiled. "That's why we're doing it." It was more than money. It was legacy. It was proof that someone saw what I was building and wanted to stand behind it. Not because they had to, but because they believed in it. I used the funds to launch Mirror Foundation, expanding the predictive equity work I'd started at Verdict. We began training local governments, offering tools to small towns that had never had access to civic data analysis. And slowly, the impact grew. Press features, invitations to speak, even a quiet acknowledgement from a senator's office. But, beyond the metrics, something else changed. I no longer carried the quiet desperation of trying to prove myself to people who refused to see me. I no longer rehearsed what I would say if my parents finally called, because the version of me they ignored no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who had learned to choose herself. Not out of revenge, but out of recognition. I still passed by their house sometimes when I visited Colorado, driving the long way to my grandparents'. The windows looked smaller than I remembered, the front porch less grand, and I realized it wasn't the house that had changed, it was me. It was almost a year to the day after the party when Noah showed up at my office. He didn't make an appointment. He just appeared, standing in the glass-walled reception area of the Mirror Foundation's DC headquarters, looking out of place in a stiff gray suit that didn't quite fit. The receptionist buzzed me, unsure whether to let him in. I said, "Yes, mostly out of curiosity." He walked into my office slowly, glancing at the wall of framed articles and community impact maps as if they were in a language he didn't quite understand. I didn't offer him a seat. He sat anyway. "I'm not here to argue," he started. I need to ask something." I waited. "How did you do it?" he asked finally, eyes lowered. "How did you build all this? Without help? Without anyone pushing you forward?" For a moment, I thought about everything I could say. I thought about the years in the attic, the lonely victories, the silences that screamed louder than words. I thought about every time I'd watched him praised for effort I'd matched in the dark. But I didn't speak from anger. I had no choice, I said quietly. When no one lifts you up, you learn to stand because falling means disappearing. He nodded, slowly, as if the words took time to sink in. He didn't defend himself. He didn't apologize either. And I realized that maybe he couldn't. Maybe he wasn't ready to see the truth for what it was. Not a rivalry, but a pattern he had benefited from without ever questioning. He stood up, glanced around once more, and said, "You're doing good work, really." "Thank you," I replied, steady and unmoved. He left without asking to meet again. I didn't watch him go. And just like that, it was over. Not with fireworks or closure, but with a quiet exit. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sad. I just felt certain. There are moments in life when you realize the person you once wanted recognition from no longer has anything to give you. And in that realization, there's peace. Not the kind you fight for, but the kind you earn by no longer needing what never came. What Rachel's story reveals is more than just a family's favoritism. It's the anatomy of quiet erasure. When a child is consistently overlooked, dismissed, or deprioritized, it doesn't always leave visible scars. It leaves silence. It teaches them to shrink themselves to avoid conflict, to perform competence without recognition, and to internalize the belief that love is something earned only through perfection or obedience. But here's the truth. Self-worth isn't a reward others hand you. It's a truth you reclaim when you stop needing permission to exist fully. Rachel didn't win by humiliating anyone. She won by refusing to disappear, even when the people closest to her preferred the convenience of her absence. In doing so, she didn't just reclaim her story, she rewrote the rules. And sometimes that's what justice really is. Not revenge, but clarity. Not shouting louder, but being unshakably heard. What do you think? Was Rachel right to speak up at her own party? Or should she have stayed silent for the sake of family harmony? Let us know in the comments. If this story resonated with you or reminded you of someone else who deserves to be seen, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that cut deeper than drama and linger long after the screen fades to black.